Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm Preacher Mars, the host of the S.O.S the Shout Out Show, with a special edition of the S.O.S coming from you down under from Melbourne, Australia. Listen, I've had an incredible 2 weeks out here meeting the people of Australia, beautiful people, the Australian Muslims, amazing, high achieving students, wonderful charities, people who just dialed into mankind and humanity, just trying to do things to make life a lot easier, man, a lot of compassion. Shout out to Human Appeal for bringing me out. I want to also give a shout out to my brother Nazim Hussein, who came and kicked it with me. I want to give a shout out to my main man, Bilal Kranj. We had so many people. Omar, brother Jamal, brother Abdul Nasser. We had a clique of people who came out and made sure your brother was comfortable down here. And again, shout out to all the audiences that came out to see the show and support the young students, the high achieving students. I was part of a tour that celebrates high achieving students who have a GPA above 90, and as opposed to getting, of course, recognition and a certificate, they also get a free iPad, and that's beautiful because my GPA didn't get anywhere near 90. Thus, even if it gave me an iPad, it probably wouldn't work. But that's beside the point. Brothers and sisters, I'm so glad to come to you. Last week I had a repeat show, but it seems like the world has changed. We've had Super Tuesday run through. You're getting a preview to the future. That's also the past. It looks like Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to go at it again. Disaster 2 coming to you in November. Listen, there's been a number of things that have happened around this election. The Supreme Court decided to go the direction of Donald Trump, put him back on the ballot in Colorado, which I did not agree with. He is an insurrectionist by all levels, by a military standard, also by a social standard. He's an insurrectionist. But, we're not talking about what is really going on in the space in terms of Supreme Court decisions, in terms of all of these court cases against Donald Trump being delayed, motions to dismiss, all of that. What you're seeing is a laying of a foundation of what has been called white rural rage. Let me say it again, white rural rage. Now, if you're thinking, the white rural rage, these are farmers. No, these are people who've had to change their way of living. They've had to change their way of how they make money, where they live. It's affected their mobility, aspects of the economy, aspects of social diversification. These people have found themselves on the outside. But the weird thing is they were always on the outside. It's just that they now have somebody who could speak to their level of aggression, anger, indignation, rightful in some cases, deceitful in some cases, delusional in some cases. But we have this thing now, and it will be directed against Black existence. As much as we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Gaza, we're talking about Israel, it will be a mere footnote to what's coming down the road in November. People, we're talking about catastrophic change. We're talking about a man who's a president who wants to be a king. We're talking about a man who's openly talking about dictatorship. We have a man who's actually talking about the fact that if he gets into office, he will punish and hunt down his political opponents, people who have different ideas. But you say, why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? Because there's a push that's coming from these rural areas. And these rural areas, brothers and sisters, have changed over the last 15, 20 years. The dimension of rural life has caught up to the fact that the government did something years ago that rural farmers have never recovered from. And that was liberating African-American slaves, liberating the Black minds, and liberating them in a way whereby, one, they understood free will. Two, they were able to translate free will into business ideas and business models. And number three, they were able to translate those business models into family structure. White rural existence has never been the same. Now, we're going to talk about that here on the Shout Out Show, okay? So listen, I don't want nobody to go nowhere. And we're going to make sure I get everybody straight on the show because, like I said, this is something that needs to be talked about. We're not talking about. But today, we're talking about it on the Shout Out Show, so don't you move. Oh man, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Mehdi Hassan. Mehdi Hassan had the Mehdi Hassan show on MSNBC. He recently left in MSNBC, didn't renew with them, and for good reason that I find. He's starting his own news network. Much shout out, much love to you, brother. We have your support. I have your support. We have your back. So please, whatever you need from us at the Shout Out Show, let us know immediately. So let me give a rundown. Because this is pre-recorded, I got to give a shout out to Sister Ree. Got to give a shout out to Mama Mary. Got to give a shout out to Maxine Cade. I got to give a shout out to Altaf Rashid. I got to give a shout out to Bilal Salahuddin and his lovely queen, Sister Sonia Dalton Salahuddin. Got to give a shout out to my main man, Eric Carter, my little brother, JT, Mark Kennedy, and everyone else who's out there. We won't probably be on Instagram just by the nature of having a pre-program, but I just want all of you to know, man, I miss you guys. I'm going to be back in the saddle next week with the Shout Out Show. Please hang with your brother. We have a lot to talk about. There's too much to talk about in this one show platform. Today we're talking about Black existence versus white rage. Here is the identifier to understand white rage. White rage has grown and proliferated by the fact that technology has taken away the importance of the farmer. The individual farmer is no more. The individual farmer is a victim of, 4 to 5 huge agricultural companies, they call them agricultural corporations, who price fix, who, they everything from supplies to the marketplace, they fix prices. And for the years, it needs to be said that the farmer, for a lot of years, has been subsidized by the government. The government is giving them money to grow certain things and not grow certain things. Now, let's be really, really clear about who this white rural farmer is, or this white rural farmer, or this white rural individual. I won't say farmer, but in most cases, brothers and sisters, it is the farmer. At the turn of the century, in the 1900s, they say 85% of African Americans live below the Mason-Dixon line. Hear me now, below the Mason-Dixon line. Okay, why is that important? A lot of times people attribute it to the Industrial Revolution. This is why all these black people moved up north for new opportunities, new jobs. That's part of it. The darker part of it is that land was taken. So those who are successful farmers, free farmers, owned their land, produced crops, were able to get product to the marketplace. They were seriously hampered by racism in the South. And what I mean by racism in the South, not just the 1800s, I'm talking all the way up to the 60s. There are accounts of the Nation of Islam buying property, livestock in the 1950s and having themselves chased out of, I think it was Alabama, Mississippi. I'll get my facts straight. But chased out of Alabama, and the person who actually sold them land, a white person, they proxied it with a white person, actually had to go to jail behind it. It is the fact, but this is in the white rural history, in the white rural narrative, it is incomplete, utterly incomplete, without oppressing African American farmers and people who would do that. Now you say, well, in the rural area, no. Make no mistake. Rural life is not that far from farm life. When we say rural, we're talking about people who are away from distinct marketplaces that contain technology, that contain in some places culture, that contain in many cases diversity. They are separated away from them. So what they see is white does make right, because the fact there's nothing to argue against it. Systemically, black folk can't and won't survive in these areas because it's devoid of culture, it's devoid of equity, it's devoid of common sense. And being devoid of common sense puts them in a situation where they would leave. It would make sense in the 1900s, hell, the 1800s, to leave the South just because of the reputation and relationship that African Americans had with the South, going all the way back to slavery. Hold that thought. White rage now is interesting because they're calling it white rural rage. I spelled it wrong, brother. Sister, I got to fix that. I'm gonna fix it right now. I hope y'all don't mind. This is how you have to handle stuff right sometimes, bro. Here you go. I'm gonna do it right here. White. There you go. Is that right? I got it right. There you go. But my point is, this rage has to have placement. In the history of America, anything in terms of white resistance, white expression, white pain, white dissertation, white disgruntledness has to have placement amongst people who cannot and are not able to really change the narrative. That the economy is bad has to have something to do with immigrants coming across the border, not the fact that these corporatocracies don't pay their taxes. That there's crime in these inner cities has to do with the fact that these people lack core values. This is not true. They lack opportunities. That crime is important in the business of justice in terms of white rage because it pays. Crime pays. Prison pays. Jail pays. Probation pays. Courts pays. Bail bonds pays. This whole nature of white rural rage is the fact that it's beginning to eat on itself now. So you have two candidates, two white old candidates who are definitely connected to white rage, white rural rage, because they don't come into the urban. You don't hear white urban rage, right? You hear white rural rage, which means they are a little bit further removed from, I would say, the suburban system. But this is the thing that's interesting. They are there because they can't leave. They are there because they lack social mobility. They lack occupational mobility. That in a span of about 40 to 65 years, the idea of farming has totally turned around. That you can use AI now to turn out a good farm. You can use AI now to turn out a good seed. The need for the expertise in tilling the soil is no longer there. And let me throw this point out. The people who came from down south, black folk, were not cheated out of land. I'm being incomplete. They were cheated out of good land. They were cheated out of land that produced fruit and vegetables and life and economy. They were cheated out of those because they can remember. See, back then, there was no protection of law. There's no protection of law. Everybody remember Emmett Till, Mose Allen pointing to the person that killed his grandson, his nephew. That's the man who did it. But nobody remembers the fact that court case lasted less than an hour in terms of jury deliberation. And the only reason it went that long, they say, is because the jurors asked for ice cream. So what does that mean right now moving forward for African Americans, Latinos, people of color, BIPOC? I don't like that term. BIPOC, whatever. What it means, brothers and sisters, is you're dealing with folks who are determined to make sure that you're not comfortable in your space. Meaning that you're not comfortable in your space because they can't move out of their space. You see, the whole situation with the insurrectionists was the thing that I think many of us missed, including myself, was the fact it's the first time you had a group of people. Now, you had a group of people in mass come with the idea that somehow, some way, they were going to take over the government. That this mobility and this showing was going to convince the people who were there, alhamdulillah, they thought when it came to the Capitol that they were going to have support. That the people at the Capitol, we're going to see them coming and open the doors and welcome them with open arms. That somehow the lives that they have been living in these chat rooms and QAnon and all these various existences was common speak that they were going to come in and they were going to take over the government. Now, here's the question you got to ask now. If that's the case, that's the thing we're talking about. What are we looking at moving forward in terms of actual government and actual election? I'm probably more worried now for the government of the United States than I was back in 2020, and I was extremely worried then. I called for a coup the day before the insurrection, largely based on the fact that folks were still trying to figure out after November whether the election was valid or not. And just the level, if you will, the level of conspiracy theories that have now become doctoral dissertations. You have people who have written legal and scholarly papers supporting that the election was stolen. You have this as groundswell. People producing books, people producing podcasts. Now, you're 4 years later, and the thing that's been very, very successful for Trump and his MAGA people is the fact that they made sure that the narrative never moved from 2020. And anybody who tried to move it, whether through legal proceedings, indictments, whatever, you were going to get caught up in that. That everybody was going to do anything and everything to do that. You do not hold up the situation. That you do not in any way delay progress for what's coming down the road. You literally have people saying they're going to take America back. Take us back where? Well, to when times were good. So when times when America looked like white rural America. Absence of African Americans, except those who were subjugated. Absence of Native Americans, absence of Latinos. You know, without the ability to, I would say, without the need to be able to use these people, you don't have to use all minorities because they don't do their own work. Let's be honest, they don't do their own work. And the thing about this rage, it's just been festering from the time they got here. From the time they got off the boats from England, it's been the same thing. The whole modality of white trash, dealing with white trash, expecting to have a different response. And when I say white trash, I'm talking about, of course, the white supremacy that white people had to deal with. The monarchies, if you will, that they have to deal with. And it was never resolved. It never resolved. In European countries, revolts, brothers and sisters, do not start in the city. They start in the countryside. And they start with the countryside because the people in the countryside are the ones who feel the brunt of all the policies, all the taxes. They're the ones who have the least, and they're the ones who are taken from the most. It's the same blueprint here in the United States. However, the myopic view is we're the only ones that matter in this situation. It's almost like Zionism. We can do whatever we want to, but nobody can do it to us. And if somebody does it to us, then God forbid, we have to defend this country with everything we have and forget the rules. Forget the rules. Forget fair play. Forget humanity. Forget fairness. Forget the truth. We've got to save America. But the thing is, brothers and sisters, they don't know who America is. They can't look at America and say, America is diverse. They can't look at America and say, America has people who are brilliant that don't look like you. They can't look and say, America is a place of fairness, because part of white rural rage is the fact that they aren't competitive. That these white people out in these spots, and they may not want to say it, they're not competitive. And they haven't been competitive for a long time. Take it from me. A road comic. When you do road comedy, you do some places you never even thought exist. Well, basically, several of the tours I did over the years basically gave me insight to the dysfunction of what we call middle America, the rural understanding, the rural realities of America. And they haven't been doing good a long time. Essentially, it's a revisiting, if you will, of Rosewood. You ever see the movie Rosewood? It's a revisiting that these people have come to realize that the only way that they can come up is to push everybody down. The whole idea of being sanctioned and having a legal place and quote moral turpitude to punch down other people is the only reason why this thing works for them. Clearly, there's some aspects of psychological damage, psychological concern. There are folks who are mentally ill and spiritually broken. But even with that being said, it doesn't give you the right to revisit it on people who aren't morally decimated or spiritually broken, people who have joy because they work at it. And one thing I can say about white rural rage, and this might be, it's not even controversial, I'm just confirming it. These are people who have long since lost the idea of joy in their lives. Why do I say that? Because nothing matters to them to be happy unless they know that they're making someone else miserable. They know that they're breaking someone else's spirit. And what happens when they can't break that spirit? When they do the most they can, like they're doing now. You know, that Ron DeSantis just lost on his against woke legislation. They just had to say it makes no sense. It's unconstitutional that you would limit conversations about diversity and people's experiences and their backgrounds. It is in and of itself un-American. Forget unconstitutional, un-American. And now we have this thing, a white rural rage. And let me tell you what it means for Black existence. What it means for Black existence is that there's now a willingness, a consensus at some point in time. The Black existence, it's not that it doesn't mean anything, but it's counterproductive to white rural rage, white rural existence, and white rural objectives. When we say Black existence, you got to put Black here and everybody lines up after that. We are the front line and the back line in terms of popular culture and iconic culture here in the United States, particularly when it comes to protests and resistance. What they're trying to do now is take our place, take our narrative. They're trying to say that they've been the victim the whole time. Despite all the victimization, I can't even go into it, things that have been done to snuff out, alter, and eradicate Black life, not Black Life Matters, Black life, period, here in the United States. They have not been able to do it. So just the same as Elvis heard a man named Roy Hamilton sing Don't Let Go, and he stole Roy Hamilton's style. He said, I can't beat Roy Hamilton. The only way I can beat him is to take his style, introduce it over here. And you're now seeing white rural rage being introduced to young white men, young white women, Generation X, who ain't been doing a damn thing anyway. Literally. Without the rage, they would have failed anyway. So listen, let me be very careful as I go to the rap. This will be a very contentious election. Doesn't matter who wins, doesn't matter who loses. If Trump loses, we're going to go way back to what we did to 2024. And I believe this time, the military better be ready. Armed services better be ready. We better be ready, because now you have a bunch of people who feel like they have purpose. Now they feel like they've been objectified and they've not been heard. So now the idea is they're going to come harder. And the permeation of this idea of white victimization, which undergirds the whole idea of white rural rage, now becomes dangerous because it's an election season. And if you haven't been sleeping, or if you have been sleeping, you noticed that they got smart. They did it at a local level. They did it at a local level and the state level. Because if I can hold my little city, my town, my state with this whole ideology, and we get it's literally the secession of white rural rage here in the United States. That's what we're looking at. Countries who will not identify, states who will frame themselves as countries who will not identify with the United States Constitution. And that's the one thing I have to say about white rural rage, because it has nothing to do with the Constitution, Bill of Rights, any of that, amendments, any of that. It is this self-contrived, foolish, unnecessarily and silly didactic understanding that somehow, some way, our black suffering somehow is not real because it did not benefit them. That's what it is on the Shout Out Show. Guys, I'll see you next week. Again, shout out to everybody in Australia. I want to give a shout out to Sister Sultana. She wasn't able to join us today because we're doing a live joint, and it's really early where she is. So forgive me, brothers and sisters. I'll be back in the States on Thursday. God bless you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you soon the next week. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope everybody got out to vote. More importantly, start thinking and looking in the crevices, pulling the curtain back, because white rural rage is real. They just can't put it on the ballot box. Okay, assalamu alaikum.